In 1990, a Stanford graduate student named Elizabeth Newton ran an experiment so simple it barely needs equipment. One person picks a famous song and taps the rhythm on a table. Another person listens and tries to name it. Before the guessing starts, the tapper predicts how often the listener will get it. Tappers predicted the listener would succeed about half the time. The actual rate was around 2.5%. Sitting inside the tapper's head, the melody is playing in full. The listener hears knocking on wood, and the tapper cannot imagine it any other way. Because once you know something, you lose the ability to remember what not knowing it was like. That single result explains most of this video. 6 findings are coming, and number 5 is the one that will make you dismiss the other 5 by tomorrow morning. 1. You mistake your own knowledge for the obvious. The tapping study is one demonstration of what economists Colin Camerer, George Lowenstein, and Martin Weber had already named the curse of knowledge. Once information is in your head, you systematically overestimate how available it is to everyone else. Follow that through to what it does to your self-assessment. The thing you're good at does not feel like a skill from the inside. It feels like the floor. You spot the flaw in an argument and assume everyone saw it. You explain something clearly and assume it was simple. You solve a problem at work and assume it solved itself. Meanwhile, the things you're bad at are extremely visible to you, because incompetence announces itself. You feel the struggle in real time. So your internal picture is built from a full inventory of your weaknesses and almost no record of your strengths, and it produces exactly the person who thinks they are unremarkable. Notice that this cuts against the way we usually explain modesty. Nobody has to be humble for this to happen. The bias is in the measuring instrument, and it runs whether you're modest or not. 2. The overthinking you're trying to stop is doing something. Alexander Penny, Victoria Miedema, and Dwight Mazmanian tested 126 undergraduates in 2015 with an intelligence measure and a battery of worry and rumination questionnaires. Verbal intelligence came out as a positive predictor of worry and of rumination, after controlling for test anxiety and general negative feeling. Nonverbal intelligence showed no such relationship at all. Now the caveats, and they matter. These are small correlations around 0.2 in a student sample. Small correlations tell you about tendencies across groups, not about you specifically, and a 2019 follow-up sharpened it usefully. When researchers separated rumination into brooding, which is the circular self-critical kind, and reflective pondering, which is the analytical kind, the link to intelligence ran through reflective pondering. So the honest version is not that misery equals brains. It is that the machinery producing your 3 in the morning analysis is the same verbal machinery that does your best thinking, pointed at a problem it cannot solve at that hour. 3. If people laugh, that is a measurement. Gil Greengross and Jeffrey Miller gave 400 undergraduates 2 intelligence tests and then a task: write captions for cartoons. Independent judges rated how funny the captions were with no knowledge of anyone's scores. Humor production correlated with general intelligence at around 0.39, strongest for the verbal and crystallized side. In personality research, that is a substantial effect. It also replicated. In 2018, Christensen and colleagues ran a different humor production task with 285 adults and found a correlation of around 0.37 after controlling for personality, which makes sense once you look at what a joke requires. You have to model what the audience is expecting, hold that expectation in mind, construct a violation of it, and time the delivery, that is working memory, verbal fluency, and theory of mind operating together in about 2 seconds. Being funny is not a consolation prize handed to people who are not clever. It is one of the more reliable everyday signals we have. 4. Wanting to know is a comparable engine to trying hard. Sophie von Stum, Benedict Hell, and Tomasz Chamorro-Premuzic ran a meta-analysis in 2011 asking what actually predicts academic performance. Intelligence came first, as it usually does. What they found next is the useful part. Intellectual curiosity, measured as typical intellectual engagement, predicted performance at around 0.33, and when they modeled curiosity and conscientiousness together, the combined effect of those two rivaled intelligence itself. They called it the hungry mind and argued it belongs alongside ability and effort rather than beneath them. So consider the thing you do that feels like time wasting. The 3 hours reading about a subject with no use to you. The rabbit hole you fell into on a Tuesday night. The question you looked up because it was bothering you and nobody asked you to. That is not a distraction from a productive trait. It is one of the traits. And it is worth saying what this does not mean, because the finding gets stretched. Curiosity did not beat intelligence in their models, and reading widely will not substitute for knowing your subject. What the data supports is narrower and still worth having. The appetite itself is doing measurable work, and most people write it off as procrastination with a better vocabulary. 5. Feeling like a fraud is not evidence that you are one. Here's the one I promised you. Pauline Clance and Suzanne Imus described the imposter phenomenon in 1978 among high-achieving women who were convinced their success was luck, timing, or having fooled somebody. They had the credentials, the results, and the external recognition, and none of it converted into a belief that they were competent. A systematic review by Bravata and colleagues in 2020 found the pattern reported across an enormous range of populations and professions, with prevalence estimates varying so widely between studies that no single figure is worth quoting. I want to be careful about what this does and does not show. It does not show that feeling like a fraud proves competence. Plenty of people feel like frauds and are simply new at something, which is the correct feeling to have. What it shows is that the feeling and the evidence come apart routinely, and that your sense of your own ability is not a readout of your ability. It is a separate thing with its own causes, and this is why the video will not stick. You will hear these findings, apply them to a colleague, and quietly file yourself under the exception. 6. Noticing where your knowledge stops is the rarest thing on this list. If you have watched this far waiting for the catch, or thinking about which of these are correlational, or wondering how big the samples were, that response is itself the finding. Researchers on intellectual humility describe it roughly as recognizing that your beliefs might be wrong and being willing to revise them when the evidence says so. It is measured as a disposition, and it is not the same thing as low confidence. Most people go their whole lives without the habit of checking. They answer instantly, defend the answer, and never audit either one. The check costs something and produces nothing you can show anybody. The people who do it tend to describe themselves as uncertain, because they are the only ones actually looking at the edges of what they know. Everyone else is standing in the middle of their knowledge, assuming it extends in all directions. Now, the part most videos like this leave out. I nearly included a 7th fact, that people whose minds wander during easy tasks have greater working memory capacity. Levinson, Smallwood, and Davidson reported that in 2012, and it is quoted everywhere. In 2019, a pre-registered replication with 315 participants found that if the relationship exists, it most likely runs the other way. So I left it out. The marshmallow test is in the same category. The 2018 replication with a much larger and more varied sample found the childhood delay effect substantially smaller than the famous version, and much of what remained was explained by family background rather than willpower. I mentioned both because a video called 6 Facts That Show You're Smarter Than You Think could very easily be 6 flattering things with no evidence behind them, and the internet has plenty of those. Messy desks, night owls, swearing, talking to yourself. Almost none of it survives contact with the literature. What does survive is smaller and more interesting. Your self-estimate is built from bad data, because your strengths are invisible from the inside, and your weaknesses are not. The thinking you're trying to switch off is running on the same equipment as your best work. Laughter is a measurement. Curiosity is an engine, and the discomfort you feel about your own competence is a poor instrument for measuring it. None of that makes you a genius. And I would not trust anyone who told you otherwise after 8 minutes. It makes you someone who is probably wrong about themselves in a specific and predictable direction, which is a much more useful thing to know. That is the cue most people miss. Which of the 6 landed closest to home? Leave it in the comments. Subscribe to Psychology Q, and I will keep showing you the signals hiding in plain sight.